"I don't need saving," she said. "Then stay and save my sons," the rancher answered. The sun was already dipping behind the distant hills, casting long shadows across the dusty country road. Clara gripped the steering wheel of her old pickup with both hands, her knuckles turning white. The engine coughed and groaned, but it kept moving just barely, like it understood the urgency of the situation. In the back seat, her two sons, Eli and Sam, sat quietly, their eyes wide as they stared at the passing fields. The air inside the truck smelled of leather, dust, and a faint trace of yesterday's coffee. The boys were used to long drives, but tonight was different. Tonight there was tension, a kind of nervous energy that neither child fully understood but both felt deep in their bones. Clara's mind was racing. Every mile that passed brought her further from the life she had known, the life that had offered no comfort, no understanding, no safety. People in the town had long whispered about her, their judgment heavy in the air like smoke. She had learned to live with it, to hide her pain, to carry her burdens alone. Being independent was her shield. It had always been. But tonight, with a storm coming, she felt a flicker of doubt. Could she really do this alone? Could she keep her children safe without anyone's help? The boy's small hands tapped nervously on the back seat. Eli, the older of the two at 10 years old, tried to distract his younger brother, Sam, who was barely 6. "We'll be okay," Eli whispered, more to convince himself than his brother. Sam clutched his worn-out stuffed bear tightly, pressing it against his chest as if it could protect him from the fear he didn't fully understand. Clara stole a glance in the rearview mirror and saw their anxious faces. Her heart ached. She wanted to soothe them, to tell them that everything would be all right, but words felt useless tonight. Actions mattered more than words. As the truck rattled over a small bridge, Clara noticed movement on the side of the road. At first, it was easy to dismiss. A shadow, the trick of the fading light. But then she saw him clearly. A man on horseback, tall and broad-shouldered, emerged from the field beyond the fence. His presence was commanding, almost as if the land itself had sent him to watch over the travelers. He was older, with weathered skin that told stories of decades spent outdoors, and eyes sharp enough to notice details others would miss. This was Hank, a rancher known throughout the valley for his strength, his courage, and his fairness. Hank slowed his horse to match the speed of the pickup. "Evening," he called out, his voice calm but firm, cutting through the sound of the wind. Clara's instinct was to ignore him, to keep moving, to maintain control. She had faced judgment before, strangers who wanted to tell her how to live, how to care for her children, how to behave. She didn't need anyone's advice, no matter how well-meaning. "We're fine," she said, her voice tight, trying to sound confident. But Hank didn't turn away. He trotted alongside the truck for a moment, studying the scene. He saw the tension in Clara's shoulders, the fear in the children's eyes, and he understood without being told. This wasn't just a family on a drive. Something was wrong. The storm clouds in the distance added urgency to the scene, the gray sky heavy with rain that could flood the valley in a matter of hours. Clara pressed her foot harder on the gas pedal, trying to put distance between herself and the man who seemed to appear out of nowhere. But the road was narrow, winding, and the truck's old engine protested under the strain. She knew she couldn't outrun the storm, and even if she couldn't outrun the fear gnawing at her heart. The boys sensed it too, their small bodies tensing with each bump and turn. "Ma'am," Hank called again, raising his hand in a gesture of calm, "there's water up ahead. The crossing could be dangerous with this rain." His voice wasn't commanding, it was warning, steady and deliberate. Clara's pride flared. She had crossed rivers before. She had managed worse. She didn't need saving. She wouldn't let anyone tell her she did. "I said we're fine," she replied, sharper this time, her jaw set. The boys looked at her nervously. Clara saw their fear reflected in the rearview mirror, and a pang of guilt stabbed her chest. She wanted to be strong for them, but the truth was, The world felt heavier tonight than it had in a long time. She hated feeling weak, but she couldn't shake the unease gnawing at her. Hank studied the old truck carefully. He had seen many families in trouble, many people too proud to accept help until it was almost too late. He recognized the signs, the taut jaw, the clenched hands, the way Clara's eyes darted constantly to the river ahead. He didn't speak again immediately, choosing instead to ride quietly beside them, giving her space while staying close enough to intervene if necessary. The first drops of rain began to fall, soft at first, tapping against the windshield in a gentle rhythm. Clara turned on the wipers, but the storm was growing quickly. The sky darkened, the wind picked up, and the river in the valley below began to rise ominously. Eli and Sam huddled closer together, their small voices whispering questions to each other. "Mom, are we going to be okay?" Sam asked, voice trembling. Clara swallowed hard. "Yes, we're fine," she said, though her words lacked conviction. She had always told herself that she could handle anything. Life had taught her that relying on others was dangerous. But now, with the storm approaching and the boys' fear palpable, she felt the limits of her independence pressing down on her. Pride battled with necessity inside her. She wanted to be strong, but part of her wondered if she had been too strong for too long. Hank watched quietly, noticing every detail. He didn't judge her. He understood the weight of responsibility, the pride that came with doing everything alone. He knew the right moment to speak, and it came just as the rain began to fall harder, streaking the windows with a steady sheet of water. "Clara," he said gently, using her name for the first time, "I can help. Your boys don't need to be in danger." She stared at him, her fingers tightening around the steering wheel. She wanted to refuse to continue alone, but something in his calm, steady gaze made her pause. It wasn't pity or judgment. It was concern, genuine and unshakable. For a moment, she imagined what it would be like to accept help, to feel supported without losing her dignity. But pride is a stubborn companion. "I don't need saving," she said firmly, her voice betraying only a fraction of the fear that lingered beneath. Hank nodded as if he had expected this. "I understand," he replied. Then almost softly he added, "But the river doesn't care about pride, Clara. It only cares about those who cross it safely." The truck rattled over a pothole and the boys yelped. Clara's heart thumped painfully in her chest. She knew Hank was right. The river ahead was unpredictable, dangerous. She could feel its power even from a distance. She swallowed, the taste of fear sharp on her tongue, and realized that for the first time in a long time, she might not be able to face this challenge alone. As the storm clouds rolled closer and the wind began to howl through the valley, Clara's eyes met Hank's. There was an unspoken understanding between them. He wasn't there to take over, only to help if she allowed it. The boys clutched each other, their small hands shaking. Clara took a deep breath and gripped the wheel tighter, preparing for the difficult journey ahead. The pickup continued down the road, the rain falling harder now, the river swelling with each passing minute. Clara's pride was still strong, but so was the pull of survival. She glanced at her sons, their eyes wide with fear and trust, and something inside her shifted. The world was bigger than her independence, bigger than her struggles, and tonight it would test her in ways she had never imagined. Hank rode beside the truck for a few more moments, keeping pace as the rain pelted down. He knew that the real test wasn't just the river or the storm. It was whether Clara could accept that sometimes. Being strong didn't mean standing alone. Sometimes it meant letting someone else share the burden, even if only for a night. The sun had vanished completely behind the hills, leaving only the gray, heavy sky and the sound of the wind and rain. The road stretched ahead, uncertain and dangerous, but Clara's determination was clear. She would protect her sons, no matter what. But for the first time in a long while, she wondered if she could do it without facing the storm alone. And so, with the rain falling harder, the truck rattling over the road, and the distant shadow of Hank beside them. Clara drove forward, holding on to both pride and fear, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The storm was coming, and the river was waiting, but so were choices she had never allowed herself to make before. The rain had started as a gentle patter, but now it was a relentless torrent, hammering the roof of Clara's old pickup and turning the dirt road into a slick, slippery track. Water pooled in the ruts and ran in small streams across the road, carrying leaves, mud, and broken branches with it. Clara's eyes were fixed on the winding road ahead, but no matter how carefully she drove, the truck slid slightly every now and then, threatening to spin out. Her hands ached from gripping the steering wheel so tightly. She could feel the tension in her shoulders, in her neck, in her chest. Her sons were quiet now, but she knew they were frightened. "Mom," Eli's voice came from the back seat, small and nervous. Is this river going to get bigger?" Clara stole a glance at him through the rearview mirror. His round face was pale, eyes wide and shining with worry. Sam, clutching his stuffed bear, peeked over his brother's shoulder, his small mouth trembling. Clara swallowed hard. She wanted to tell them that everything was fine, that she had it under control, but deep down, she knew she couldn't lie to them this time. The river ahead was swelling fast, faster than she had ever seen it before. "We'll be okay," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. "Just a little longer, okay?" The boys nodded, but she could tell that her words did little to calm them. The truth was, she was unsure herself. Her pride told her she could handle this, that she didn't need anyone's help, but the storm was bigger than her, bigger than her truck, bigger than anything she had ever faced on her own. Hank's figure appeared again, riding alongside the truck as if he had been waiting for this very moment. His horse plodded steadily through the mud, its hooves slipping slightly on the slick earth, but Hank remained steady. He didn't rush or panic. He simply observed the situation, ready to act if Clara needed him. He saw the way her hands shook slightly on the wheel, the way her jaw tightened, the way her eyes darted anxiously toward the rising river. "You're going to want to slow down," Hank called over the rain. His voice was calm but carried authority, like someone who had faced many storms and rivers and had learned when to fight and when to step back. "The crossing up ahead is dangerous. The water's rising faster than it looks." Clara's pride flared again. She didn't like being told what to do, especially by a man she had only just met. "We're fine," she said again, her voice firmer this time. "We've crossed rivers before. We don't need saving." She could see Hank nod slightly, as if he expected this, and then he fell back a little, giving her space but still close enough to intervene if the river became truly dangerous. The road curved sharply ahead, and Clara slowed the truck as best she could, trying to keep control. The rain fell harder, stinging her face through the window. Her heart pounded in her chest. She thought of her sons, their small hands gripping each other, their frightened faces pressed together. She wanted to be strong for them, but fear gnawed at her resolve. Suddenly, a branch from a nearby tree broke loose and tumbled across the road. Clara swerved slightly to avoid it, the truck sliding dangerously. Her chest tightened with panic. She could feel the truck tilting slightly as the mud threatened to pull it into the ditch. She slammed her foot on the brake, but the tires struggled for grip. Eli cried out from the back seat. Sam's stuffed bear flew from his arms as he instinctively clutched his brother. Clara's heart skipped a beat. Hank was at her side in a flash, his horse steady in the mud. He shouted instructions over the rain, guiding her to slow down carefully and steer to a safer patch of ground. His presence was commanding but not overbearing. He wasn't taking control. He was helping her keep control. Clara's pride bristled at first, but the reality of the situation quickly outweighed stubbornness. She followed his advice, adjusting the wheel, easing the brake, and slowly bringing the truck to more stable ground. Once they were safely past the branch, Clara exhaled sharply. Her hands trembled as she gripped the wheel. Her sons were quiet, shaken, but unharmed. She glanced at Hank, who nodded slightly, his calm eyes reassuring. He didn't speak immediately. He let her regain composure first. "You did well," he said finally. "The river up ahead, it's stronger than you think. I can help you cross it safely." Clara's pride flared, but so did a flicker of realization. The river was swelling fast, much faster than she had anticipated. There was no way her truck could handle the full force of it alone. The truth she had avoided all her life pressed down on her chest. Maybe this time she couldn't do it by herself. I can't," she admitted finally, her voice barely audible over the rain. The words felt strange on her tongue, almost foreign. She had spent so long telling herself that she didn't need anyone, that asking for help was weakness. But standing here, facing the swollen river with her children terrified in the back seat, she knew it wasn't weakness. It was survival. Hank nodded gently. "There's no shame in getting help when it counts. Your boy's safety is the most important thing. Pride can wait." His words sank in slowly, like seeds planted in dry soil. Clara had always been proud, fiercely independent, but tonight she had to recognize that survival sometimes required trust. The rain fell harder and the wind whipped through the valley. Trees swayed, their branches bending under the storm's force. The river, now just visible in the dim light, roared angrily as it surged across the banks. Clara felt her stomach twist with fear. She thought of every obstacle she had ever faced alone, every battle she had fought without support. And she realized bitterly that this storm was unlike anything she had faced before. Alone, she might fail. Her sons' small voices broke through her thoughts. "Mom, we're scared," Sam whispered, his tiny hand pressing against her shoulder. Clara swallowed hard. She reached into the back seat, taking Eli's hand in one of hers and Sam's in the other. "It's okay," she said softly. "We're going to be okay. I promise." Her words sounded hollow even to her own ears, but she knew that action mattered more than words. Hank spoke again, his voice steady over the storm. "Clara, I'm going to help. Let me take your boys first. We'll get them across safely." Clara's heart thumped loudly. Pride screamed at her to refuse, to continue alone, but logic and love for her sons forced her to hesitate. She looked at Eli and Sam, their small faces pale and wet from the rain, their eyes full of trust. Could she really leave their safety to chance? Finally, with a deep breath that seemed to draw courage from somewhere she didn't know she had, Clara nodded. "Okay," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "We will do it your way, for them." Hank's face softened and he moved quickly, securing ropes and preparing a makeshift path across the river. Clara watched closely, her hands still gripping the truck, ready to move if necessary. The storm raged around them, but for the first time she felt a flicker of hope. They weren't alone. There was help. There was a chance. As Hank worked, guiding the boys safely across the first slippery rocks, Clara felt a strange mix of relief and fear. Every step they took seemed perilous, yet every step also reinforced a new truth. Accepting help didn't mean losing control. It meant surviving, thriving even, in ways she couldn't have imagined on her own. The boys clung to Hank's arms, their small bodies shivering in the rain, but their trust in him was complete. Clara's heart swelled with gratitude she couldn't fully express. She wanted to tell him so, but words felt unnecessary. Actions had already spoken. Minutes passed like hours, and slowly, carefully, the boys were on the safer side of the riverbank. Clara's chest ached with relief. She had faced the storm, and though her pride had been challenged, she had survived. And more importantly, her sons had survived. Hank looked at her, the rain plastering his hair to his forehead, his eyes calm and strong. "Your boys are safe," he said simply. "Now let's get you across." Clara nodded, taking a deep breath. The road ahead was still dangerous, the storm still raging, but together they could face it. Together they could survive. And in that moment, Clara understood something she had never allowed herself to feel before. Sometimes, strength didn't mean standing alone. Sometimes, it meant trusting someone enough to let them stand with you. The rain had slowed to a steady drizzle, but the valley was still drenched, and the river rumbled angrily as if it had not yet finished testing them. Clara's hands, though trembling, had finally loosened their iron grip on the steering wheel. Her sons, Eli and Sam, had been safely guided across the first part of the river by Hank, and for the first time in hours, she allowed herself to breathe a little. Yet there was no time to relax fully. The journey was not over, and the next stretch of road was even more treacherous. Clara watched as Hank prepared the path for the truck. He moved with calm precision, securing ropes to trees along the riverbank and checking the ground for the firmest footing. Every action was deliberate, practiced, someone who had faced storms and floods countless times. She admired his composure, even though pride tugged at her chest, whispering that she should have done it alone. But seeing him care for her sons, seeing the care in his steady hands, Clara felt something she had rarely experienced in her life: trust. "Mom," Eli's voice broke her thoughts. He was wet, muddy, but safe, standing close to his younger brother. "Are we really going to get across?" Clara knelt down to meet his eyes, brushing wet hair from his forehead. She saw fear there, yes, but also courage, the quiet bravery that comes from leaning on someone you trust. "Yes," she said, her voice low but firm. "We're going to get across, all of us, together." She reached for Sam's small hand, squeezing it gently. Sam's grip tightened around hers, a silent affirmation that he believed her, even when fear clawed at his chest. Clara felt a swell of determination. She had spent so long protecting her boys alone, but now she realized that survival sometimes required a partner, someone who could share the burden when the odds seemed impossible. Hank turned his gaze toward Clara, nodding slightly. "I'll guide the truck across. You stay in the cab, focus on steering, but listen to my directions. Don't try to fight the river, work with it." His voice carried authority, but it was not harsh. It was firm, steady, and reassuring. Clara swallowed, her pride still whispering resistance, but she had learned a hard lesson in the last hours. This storm was bigger than pride. The truck rumbled forward slowly. Water lapped at the tires as they entered the river, swirling around in fast currents. Clara's breath came in short gasps as she fought the instinct to panic. The truck tilted slightly on uneven ground, and for a moment her heart lurched. Hank's voice cut through the roar of the water. "Turn left, hard, now," Clara obeyed, twisting the wheel with all her strength. The truck lurched but remained upright, following the path Hank had marked with ropes and careful instructions. Every step required focus, patience, and courage. The boys in the back held their breath, trusting their mother completely, and Clara felt the weight of that trust pressing on her shoulders. As they reached the middle of the river, a sudden surge of water hit the truck's side, rocking it violently. Clara's heart skipped a beat. She gritted her teeth and kept the wheel steady, listening intently for Hank's guidance. "Hold steady, don't overcorrect." His voice was a lifeline, cutting through the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. Minutes stretched like hours. Every ripple in the water, every shift of the current, sent adrenaline rushing through Clara's body. Her sons whispered quietly to each other, clinging to the seat, to each other, and to the hope that their mother would lead them safely. Clara's hands ached, but she refused to let go. She would not fail them. She could not. Finally, with a careful series of turns and adjustments, the truck's tires touched firmer ground on the opposite riverbank. Clara exhaled in relief so powerful it almost shook her. The boys cheered quietly, their small faces lighting up with smiles, though still wet and muddy. Clara leaned back, her chest heaving, her heart still pounding from the intensity of the crossing. She glanced at Hank, who smiled faintly, his eyes calm and reassuring. "You did well," he said simply. "All of you. It wasn't easy, but you made it." Clara wanted to argue, to insist that she had done it alone, but she stopped herself. She realized that Hank's help had not diminished her efforts, it had made success possible. Her pride softened, replaced with a quiet gratitude she had rarely allowed herself to feel. The boys ran to explore the muddy bank, splashing cautiously in shallow puddles, laughing for the first time since the storm began. Clara watched them, a smile tugging at her lips despite the weariness she felt. There was something healing in seeing them safe, something that made the long hours of fear worth it. Hank approached, wiping rain from his face, and offered Clara a hand. She hesitated for a heartbeat, then took it, feeling the strength in his grip. "Thank you," she said quietly. It was simple, but it carried more weight than she could express. Hank nodded, understanding completely. No one had ever forced her to rely on them before, and yet here she was, standing in the mud with her children safe and alive. Words felt small compared to the reality of survival, but they were enough. The storm was still not over. Clouds lingered low over the hills, and the drizzle was relentless. Clara knew they needed to find shelter, somewhere safe to wait out the remainder of the rain. Hank gestured toward a small structure on his property, a sturdy barn that had weathered many storms over the years. "We can get you and the boys inside there," he said. "It's dry, safe, and we can regroup." Clara nodded, grateful. Pride still whispered resistance, but safety for her children was louder than pride. Inside the barn, the smell of hay and damp wood greeted them. Eli and Sam shook off their soaked clothes, shivering slightly but still smiling. Clara wrapped a blanket around each of them, holding them close. Their small arms clung to her, and she felt the warmth of their trust and relief. "You're safe now," she whispered, smoothing Sam's damp hair. "We're all safe now." Hank stood near the entrance, scanning the skies, but he relaxed slightly, seeing them safe inside. He had guided countless families through storms like this, but there was always tension, always the knowledge that nature could be unpredictable. Tonight had tested them, but it had also brought something else: understanding, connection, and a new kind of trust. Clara watched Hank move around, gathering some dry firewood and setting up a small fire to warm the barn. The flames cast a soft glow across the walls, flickering shadows dancing in rhythm with the storm outside. She felt a sense of calm she hadn't known in years. Her sons were safe, the storm was being weathered, and she was no longer entirely alone. For the first time, Clara allowed herself to talk, to share pieces of her story. She told Hank of the struggles she had faced raising her boys alone, of the nights she had spent worried and exhausted, of the pride that had always kept her from asking for help. Hank listened, nodding without interruption, his expression gentle. He didn't judge, he simply understood. "Your strength is remarkable," Hank said finally, "but strength isn't about standing alone. It's about surviving, protecting the people you love, and sometimes that means letting someone stand with you." Clara nodded slowly, letting the words sink in. They were words she had never allowed herself to hear, and yet they rang true. The boys, now warmed by the fire and blankets, played quietly with a few scraps of wood and hay. Their laughter was small but genuine, a sound that lifted the heavy tension in the barn. Clara watched them and felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. She had faced the storm, faced the river, and had come through it with her children safe. The realization was humbling, yet empowering. As the night deepened, the storm outside continued to rage, but inside the barn, a quiet warmth had settled. Clara sat on a bale of hay, her sons beside her, and looked at Hank. She didn't need to speak to understand the silent acknowledgement between them. Tonight, they had survived. Tomorrow, the world might still be harsh, but they had proven something vital, that even in the face of danger, courage and trust could guide them through. And as the rain tapped gently against the roof, Clara allowed herself a small, private smile. She had crossed the river, both literally and metaphorically. She had begun to understand that being strong didn't mean refusing help. It meant choosing when to accept it, especially when the lives of those she loved most depended on it. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the valley dripping and glistening under a gray, heavy sky. The river, though calmer than before, still roared angrily, its water rushing past the banks with a relentless energy. Clara stepped outside the barn, her boots sinking slightly into the wet earth. Her sons, Eli and Sam, ran ahead, exploring the puddles and mud, laughing despite the storm that had frightened them hours ago. Clara watched them, feeling relief wash over her in waves. They were safe for now, but she knew that the real test wasn't over. Hank appeared beside her, his coat damp and his hat dripping, but his posture remained calm and steady. "We need to get your truck across the river," he said simply. "It's the only way you'll continue your journey safely." Clara nodded, swallowing a lump of apprehension in her throat. Pride still whispered at the back of her mind, but logic and love for her sons drowned it out. She had learned that survival often required trust, and she trusted Hank. The boys ran back toward the barn, holding small bundles of supplies they had gathered, a few blankets, some snacks, and a small lantern. Clara called them back, kneeling to meet their eyes. "Stay close to me," she said firmly but softly. "We're going to do this together, just like we've been doing." Eli nodded, a serious expression on his young face, while Sam clutched her hand tightly, eyes wide but trusting. Clara felt a protective surge in her chest. No matter how dangerous the river, she would not let it harm her boys. Hank prepared the ropes again, tying them securely to trees along the riverbank. He explained to Clara how to guide the truck carefully, how to work with the water instead of against it. "Don't fight it," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Let the current guide the tires, but keep your eyes on the path. Steady hands, steady mind. That's all it takes." Clara nodded, taking a deep breath. Her hands gripped the wheel, but this time she felt a little more confident. She had faced the river once before, and though it had been terrifying, she had survived. The boys climbed back into the truck, Eli taking the front passenger seat and Sam sitting next to him in the back. Clara took her place behind the wheel, her fingers tightening around the worn steering wheel. Hank moved to the side, guiding her with clear instructions, his calm presence a steady anchor against the rising anxiety in her chest. The truck rumbled forward slowly, its tires sinking slightly into the muddy riverbank. Clara focused on Hank's voice, tuning out the roar of the water and the memory of the previous crossing. As they entered the river, the current tugged at the truck, threatening to push it off course. Clara's heart pounded, but she followed Hank's instructions carefully. Left, a little more, steady, steady. His voice was a lifeline, steady and unwavering. She adjusted the wheel, her body tense with concentration, and slowly the truck moved forward inch by inch. The boys in the back held their breath, their small hands gripping the edges of the seats, eyes wide. Halfway across, a sudden surge of water struck the truck's side, rocking it violently. Clara gasped, her hands tightening on the wheel as fear threatened to take over. Eli's voice called out nervously, "Mom." "Are we going to be okay?" Clara forced herself to take a deep breath, reminding herself to stay calm. "Yes," she said firmly. "We're okay, keep holding on." Her voice, steady despite her fear, seemed to reassure the boys. Hank shouted over the roar of the river, guiding her around a submerged tree trunk. "Now, turn right, hard, carefully," Clara obeyed, twisting the wheel with all her strength. The truck lurched but remained upright, the tires gripping just enough to move forward. She could feel the strain on the old vehicle, the engine working harder than it ever had before. Her heart raced, but determination burned brighter than fear. Minutes passed like hours. Every ripple, every wave, every sudden jolt tested her concentration. Yet with Hank's calm guidance and the boys' trust in her, the truck moved steadily across the river. She could feel the weight of her responsibility pressing down on her shoulders, but she refused to falter. She would not let fear control her actions. She had faced storms before, but never like this, never with her children's lives hanging in the balance. Finally, the truck's tires touched firmer ground on the opposite riverbank. Clara exhaled a long, shaky breath, relief flooding her body. She looked back at her sons, who were smiling despite the mud and wet clothes, and felt a deep surge of gratitude. They had made it. Together, they had survived. Hank nodded, his eyes calm but approving. "You did it," he said simply. "All of you." Clara wanted to argue, to claim that it was her strength alone that had guided them, but she stopped herself. She realized that Hank's presence had been vital, not a threat to her independence. Pride softened in her chest, replaced with quiet acknowledgement of the truth. Survival sometimes required accepting help, and that did not make her weak. It made her strong in a different way, strong enough to protect her children while trusting another person to help when necessary. The boys scrambled out of the truck, shaking off water and mud, and ran to explore the bank cautiously. Clara watched them, a soft smile tugging at her lips. Their laughter, small and hesitant at first, carried a new sense of confidence. They had faced fear and survived, and they had done it together. Clara felt a sense of peace she had not known in years. The storm had tested them all, but it had also revealed something vital. Courage was not about being alone. It was about facing fear, no matter who was beside you. Hank approached, gathering the ropes and checking the truck for damage. Clara followed him, curious despite herself. "You've done well," he said, looking at her directly. "Your sons are safe. That's the most important thing. The rest, well, we'll manage." His words were calm but carried weight, and Clara felt her pride shift once again. She had always believed that she had to face life entirely on her own, but tonight she understood that partnership did not diminish her strength. It enhanced it. As they moved toward a nearby field to regroup, the boys ran ahead, exploring puddles and climbing small mounds of wet earth. Clara followed slowly, taking in the scene around her. The storm had left the valley refreshed, the air clean and cool, and the smell of wet earth filled her lungs. Despite the danger they had faced, there was a strange beauty in the aftermath of the storm. It reminded her that even in the darkest moments, hope could emerge. Hank motioned for Clara to follow him to a small patch of dry ground. He knelt and inspected the truck, checking the tires and engine. "It's a little muddy, but it'll hold," he said, nodding with satisfaction. "You did well driving through that." Not everyone could manage it. Clara felt a quiet pride rise within her. It wasn't the pride of independence alone. It was the pride of survival, of courage, of protecting her children under impossible circumstances. The boys came running back, their small faces glowing with excitement and relief. Eli spoke first, his voice filled with awe. "Mom, we made it. You did it." Clara smiled, brushing wet hair from his forehead. "We did it," she corrected gently. "All of us together." Sam nodded, his small arms wrapped around her waist, and Clara felt a wave of love and gratitude so strong it nearly overwhelmed her. Hank watched the family, a quiet smile on his face. He understood the unspoken bond forming between them, the recognition that trust and courage could coexist, that independence and reliance on others were not mutually exclusive. Clara had faced the river, faced fear, and learned to allow someone else to stand beside her without diminishing her strength. The sky slowly began to clear, the gray clouds breaking to reveal faint patches of blue. The valley glistened with rain, reflecting the sunlight in tiny streams and puddles. Clara felt a sense of renewal, as if the storm had washed away not only the physical danger, but also some of the heavy burden she had carried for years. The boys laughed and ran through the field, their joy infectious, and Clara felt a warmth in her chest she hadn't felt in a long time. "Let's head to the barn for some warmth and rest," Hank suggested. "We can dry off and make a fire." "You and the boys have been through a lot tonight." Clara nodded, feeling gratitude she couldn't fully express. She followed him, walking alongside the boys who chattered excitedly about the adventure. They were tired but happy, their small spirits buoyed by the knowledge that they had survived together. As they entered the barn, the smell of hay and wood filled Clara's senses. She wrapped blankets around her sons and watched as they settled down, their faces glowing with relief. Hank gathered some firewood, striking a match and kindling a small flame that quickly grew into a warm, comforting fire. The barn was simple yet safe, a sanctuary after the storm. Clara sat on a bale of hay, her sons nestled close to her and looked at Hank. There was no need for words. Tonight they had faced the river, the storm, and fear itself. They had survived, and in that survival Clara had learned something vital. Strength was not just about standing alone. It was about protecting those you loved, facing fear with courage, and sometimes allowing someone to help you carry the weight. The boys fell asleep, their small bodies curled close to her, and Clara felt a quiet peace settle over her. Hank stood near the fire, watching them with a calm but protective gaze. Outside, the storm clouds had drifted away, leaving the valley washed and renewed, and inside, a small warmth of safety and hope filled the barn. Clara knew that the journey was far from over. The river had tested them, the storm had challenged them, but they had emerged stronger, braver, and closer than ever. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that, no matter what lay ahead, they could face it together. The first rays of the morning sun broke through the clouds, spilling light over the valley and painting the wet earth in shades of gold and green. The storm had passed completely, leaving behind a quiet, refreshed world. The river, once angry and dangerous, now flowed calmly, its waters shimmering under the soft sunlight. Clara stepped outside the barn, her boots squelching in the damp soil, and took a deep breath. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of wet earth and fresh grass. For the first time in days, she felt a sense of peace. Her sons, Eli and Sam, ran ahead to a small patch of sun-drenched field, their laughter bright and clear. Clara smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. They were safe. They were together. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that they could thrive, not just survive. Hank emerged from the barn, carrying the small ropes and supplies they had used to cross the river. He paused to watch the boys, then looked at Clara with a calm expression. "You made it," he said simply. "All of you," Clara nodded, her eyes lingering on the way his gaze seemed steady, unjudging, and understanding. He had been there when she needed him, but he had never forced himself upon her or her sons. He had simply offered help, and she had chosen to accept it. That choice, she realized, had changed everything. The boys ran back to her, mud-streaked but happy, their faces glowing with the excitement of surviving the storm. Eli hugged her waist tightly, while Sam clung to her leg, both seeking comfort and reassurance. "Mom, we're safe," Eli exclaimed, his voice filled with wonder. Clara knelt down to meet their eyes, brushing wet strands of hair from their foreheads. "Yes," she said softly, "we're safe, and we're together. That's what matters most." The memory of the storm, the river, and the fear that had gripped them all seemed distant now, almost unreal. Yet Clara knew it had changed her. She had faced moments that had once seemed impossible, confronted her own pride, and allowed herself to rely on another person without losing her strength. She had learned a truth she had never embraced fully before. Courage was not just about standing alone. It was about facing fear, protecting those you love, and sometimes allowing help to guide you through the worst moments. Hank approached, gesturing toward the truck that sat safely on the opposite riverbank. "The road ahead is clear now," he said. "You can continue your journey safely, but take your time. There's no rush." Clara nodded, grateful for the advice. She had learned during the storm that rushing or forcing her way through danger often led to mistakes. Patience, focus, and trust had carried them through, and she would not forget that lesson. The boys climbed into the truck first, eager and energetic despite their exhaustion. Clara followed, her hands tightening on the steering wheel for a moment before relaxing. Hank walked beside the truck, guiding her carefully down the damp road. "Steady, easy, you've got this," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. Clara felt a small smile tug at her lips. His words were simple, yet they carried the weight of someone who understood the challenges she faced and believed she could overcome them. As they drove down the valley, the sun breaking fully through the clouds, Clara reflected on the journey they had taken. It wasn't just the river or the storm, they had crossed much more than that. She had faced her fears, confronted her pride, and learned to trust again. She had seen the strength of her sons, their courage in the face of uncertainty, and she had realized that she did not have to carry the weight of the world alone. Eli leaned over from the passenger seat, his voice curious. "Mom, do you think the river will ever be scary again?" Clara glanced at him, smiling softly. "Maybe," she said honestly. "But now we know we can face it, and if we ever need help, it's okay to accept it. That doesn't make us weak. It makes us stronger." Eli nodded, as if understanding a truth he had not known before. Sam reached for her hand, squeezing it gently, and Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest. They drove in silence for a while, the valley stretching out before them, green and shining after the rain. The truck rumbled steadily along the road, tires gripping the earth as they made their way toward safety. Clara's thoughts wandered to the life they had left behind, the challenges, the loneliness, the constant struggle to survive. It had all been part of her story, shaping her into the person she was. But now she realized the story was changing. They had survived the storm together, and that experience had opened a door to something new. Trust, hope, and the possibility of a life where she didn't have to face every challenge alone. Hank rode alongside them for a while, guiding the truck through tricky patches and ensuring the boys remained safe. His calm presence was reassuring, a steady reminder that they had allies in the world, people willing to help when needed. Clara glanced at him, feeling gratitude swell in her chest. She had resisted help for so long, believing that independence meant standing alone. But tonight, she had learned that true strength sometimes meant allowing others to stand with you. The journey continued, and soon they reached a small clearing where the sun reflected on a tranquil pond. Clara stopped the truck for a moment, letting the boys climb out to stretch their legs. Eli and Sam ran toward the water's edge, laughing and splashing, their small voices ringing through the quiet morning. Clara watched them, her heart swelling with love and pride. They had survived fear, mud, and danger, and they had done it together. Hank dismounted his horse, approaching Clara. "You've done well," he said again, his voice calm but sincere. "You and your boys, you faced something difficult and come through stronger." Clara nodded, feeling a weight lift from her chest. She had learned something vital. Survival wasn't about doing everything alone. It was about courage, love, and sometimes trusting others to walk beside you through the storm. The boys ran back to the truck, their faces flushed with excitement and relief. Clara climbed in, taking her place behind the wheel one last time. Hank stepped aside, watching them leave, knowing they were safe. He didn't offer more advice. The lesson had been learned, the trust established. Clara was ready to continue, carrying the knowledge of what she had faced and overcome. As they drove away from the river, Clara glanced in the rearview mirror, watching the valley behind them. The storm was gone, but the lessons remained. She had learned that pride could be set aside without losing strength, that trust could exist without compromising independence, and that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was facing it, especially when the ones you loved depended on you. Eli leaned over from the passenger seat, his voice thoughtful. "Mom, do you think we'll ever have another adventure like that?" Clara smiled, squeezing his hand gently. "Maybe," she said, "but whatever comes, we'll face it together. That's what matters most." Sam nodded quietly, resting his head against her arm, trusting her completely. Clara felt a deep sense of fulfillment. They had faced danger, uncertainty, and fear, and emerged stronger, braver, and closer than ever. The road stretched out before them, sunlit and calm, as they drove toward the horizon. Clara's heart felt lighter, her mind clearer, and her spirit stronger. The storm had tested them, pushed them to their limits, and taught them lessons they would carry for the rest of their lives. She realized that life's challenges were not always meant to be faced alone. Sometimes accepting help, trusting others, and standing together could make all the difference. By the time they reached the edge of the valley, the sun was high in the sky, warming the wet earth and drying the last traces of the storm. Clara parked the truck near a small town where she and her boys could rest, eat, and continue their journey safely. The boys climbed out, stretching and smiling, and Clara felt a quiet pride in their resilience. They had faced fear together, and their bond had grown stronger because of it. Hank stayed for a moment, ensuring they were settled before he mounted his horse. "Take care of each other," he said, his voice steady. "You've learned what's important, remember it." Clara nodded, grateful beyond words. "Thank you," she said simply, meaning every word. Hank tipped his hat and rode off, leaving Clara and her sons with a sense of safety, hope, and the knowledge that courage and trust could guide them through any storm. As they walked into town together, the boys holding her hands tightly, Clara felt a quiet sense of triumph. The river had tested them, the storm had challenged them, and the night of fear had pushed them to their limits. Yet they had survived, not just physically, but emotionally. They had discovered strength in trust, courage in vulnerability, and hope in the knowledge that they could face the world together. And for the first time in a long time, Clara allowed herself to smile freely, without fear or hesitation. She had saved her sons, yes, but in the process, she had also saved a part of herself. She had learned that being strong did not mean standing alone, and that sometimes letting someone walk beside you made you stronger than you had ever been. The journey ahead would still have challenges, but now she knew they could face them together, with courage, trust, and love guiding the way.